Welcome to the Growing Green Ventures podcast, where we hear stories from entrepreneurs from across different sectors and domains, hearing about the real steps that these people took to create an organization that has lasting impact. Today, I get to speak with James McGoff, the co-founder and chief product officer at TemperPack, an innovator in the cold chain packaging space. TemperPack creates innovative packaging solutions from any product requiring a cold supply chain to arrive at its final destination. Think food delivery or certain pharmaceutical drugs. They create a range of products based out of cornstarch that replaces traditional plastic foam coolers like styrofoam and the like. Now, packaging waste represents 1/3 of all municipal trash, creating a lot of garbage, filling landfills, costing governments, municipal governments, a lot of money, and of course, emitting greenhouse gases across its entire life. Many plastic packaging creates micro and macro plastics that enter the environment and pollute our water sources that eventually end up in our food system and then of course, injected into us. On average, scientists say that we consume around 5 grams of microplastics in a week, which is the same weight as a credit card. A week. And that's just the microplastics. That's not taking into account any nano-sized particles that we can't even see because they're so hard to quantify. So companies like TemperPack and others that are reducing plastic waste in our system and finding biodegradable or recyclable alternatives is a win. In this talk, we discuss James' entrepreneurial journey, his jump straight into the creation of this business, his interest in materials, the development of materials, and how he is learning to address the needs of a growing industry with his own company, how fatherhood has impacted his business, and so much more. I had a great time speaking with James. I learned so much, and I hope you will too. Thank you so much for your time and enjoy. James, I appreciate you so much for taking the time to speak with us at the Growing Green Ventures podcast. I really appreciate it. And before we jump into the questions, I'd love for you to give yourself an introduction for our audience and give a little bit of information on your background, both professionally and, of course, educationally as well.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Maryland, Silver Spring, Maryland, and grew up one out of 6 kids, so big family.
Wow. Yeah, big family.
And funny enough, everyone is pretty entrepreneurial. Everyone's doing different things, and everyone's doing pretty well. So very
Good.
happy about all that. And I think
Good
entrepreneurship.
McGoff genes.
Well, we're trying. We're out there trying. But my dad really, both my parents really pushed, like, think different, try to create something new, try to, bring the best parts of capitalism, into the world and build something that other people can use and benefit from. And so whether it was, buying vending machines or starting a junk, removal business or mowing grass, or I was doing all that before I could kind of like legally work. And right when I could, then I switched to Starbucks. I became a barista like right when I was like 15 years old, and then did that for a couple of years. And then in high school, didn't really know what I wanted to do, but met this French Canadian girl, and who's now my wife. And I asked her where she was going to college, and she said that she was going back to Quebec, going to a school called McGill. And so I obviously applied to that school, and I just chose materials engineering because I thought it was cool, the idea of learning how to design novel materials that can do new things. It's kind of tactile. It just seemed like a cool thing to study, and I thought engineering in general was cool because you can learn how to make things, and you kind of learn how things work and how things are designed. And so I did that, and during school worked at Boeing, Space and Defense. And
in the U.S. or in Canada?
Oh, in the U.S. Yeah, down in Philadelphia. And then during the last part of the studying, we had to do like an internship. And I had done Boeing for, I think, probably like a year and a half at that point. So me and my friend Charles, we asked if we could start a company and then do an internship at the company. And which is kind of a way of, not really having any accountability, but it also was it gave us some flexibility to sort of pursue just what we thought was interesting. And so they allowed us to do that. And that's sort of where we started thinking about insulation and material science and, how to build basically how to build a product. And at that point, we also got my other friend, Brian Powers, involved, who was studying in the U.S. in Pennsylvania. And that's kind of how TemperPack got started. It's
Wow.
been like probably 10 years since then. Um,
I love that. Straight out of college, man. That's a really cool situation to be in. I mean, you have these little bits of, let's say, more traditional work experience, but then you really just you went off the diving board and just grew as a man and as an adult with your own venture. I think that's a really cool parallel. When you were a kid, you mentioned your parents like really pushing this idea of thinking differently and being different and whatnot. But did you want to be an entrepreneur? Did you want to be a founder? Was that sort of the idea of was that an idea, a strong idea in your head when you were a kid, or what did little
um,
James want to do when he grew up?
I don't actually remember, but I don't think that there was a distinction between sort of the business terminology of like company or, founder, and sort of the lifestyle distinctions of like creating and, building. So I think that the idea of creating and building was kind of always there,
Hmm.
and then kind of learned that that can fit into this mechanism of building businesses and selling
Hmm.
products.
Hmm. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about this journey of starting this business and the idea that came about when you started TemperPack in college with your friends. Did you think about it from a sense of I have this idea of creating alternative packaging, or I have this idea of um, creating something, or were you thinking I see a problem in packaging, I see a problem in the cold chain process? Can you elaborate on how
Yeah.
the idea of TimberPack actually manifested?
Um, we did it probably the wrong way, which was we started off with a solution and looked for a problem.
Gotcha.
Looking backwards now, I think the only way to do it is to focus on where is there an unmet market need
Mm,
and how can we design a novel solution that would bring
mhm,
value. But we kind of got hooked on. I remember being in class one time and there was this material called aerogel that was presented. And aerogels, if you Google image them, they're really cool material. They're super lightweight. They are incredible insulators, and
mhm,
they're almost entirely made of air. They're like 0.1% actual solid mass. They
mhm.
have this really cool blue hue to them, and you never know when inspiration is going to kind of strike. But I just remember thinking, this material is really cool. What are all the things you could do with this? And
Yeah.
one of those things was, what if you could build a cooler? And what if the cooler was like what if it weighed like a couple ounces, but it could keep food cold for a month without electricity using this novel space age silica aerogel
Mhm,
material?
mhm.
And obviously that wasn't a great idea, but it kind of started, instead of a million doors that were open, kind of,
Uh-huh.
maybe 100,000 were open, which was like,
Mm,
okay, something physical, something material based, maybe something
yeah.
insulation based, maybe something for, cold chain transportation.
Mhm,
um, and so we actually played around with aerogels and we tested them, and we reached out to Pfizer and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and UNICEF, and um, kind of pitched this idea of what if you had this really effective passive cooler that could keep anything cold. Um, and of course, that didn't go anywhere because we didn't know how to make it. It was going to be too expensive. The materials aren't really commercially available at scale.
yeah.
We didn't have any track record. We didn't have any capital or any patents or any employees or any space. Like there was nothing there. Um, but at the same time, we started hearing about like Blue Apron and like HelloFresh and Plated,
Mhm,
and these companies that were getting a lot of funding for this idea of reinventing the food system.
mm,
Their pitch was, instead of all these different stops along the supply chain from the farm um, or wherever the food is originating from, then to the wholesalers and brokers and different stops along, cold chain refrigeration and cold chain trucks, and then to the grocery store, then to the house, and then
yeah.
eventually to the trash can because we throw away a lot of food. They're like, what
Indeed.
if we could just go perfect portions with exciting recipes, and healthy choices, and get it to the consumer faster through the mail? And what if it
Mhm,
was fresher and cheaper? That was kind of their idea.
mhm.
And so that idea got them a lot of attention and a lot of funding. But for better or for worse, I don't think anyone was really hyper focused on how to deliver the food.
Mm.
And so it's kind of that whole thing of like in a gold rush, you want to be the one selling the shovels.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Totally.
so during this time of hyper growth on the food supply chain kind of transformation with meal kits, selling packaging was really good spot to be, because no one knew quite how to do it right. People were, when we cold called HelloFresh, they were still using big styrofoam coolers. And today, that would never fly with
Yeah.
consumers.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so that was kind of how we realized that, wow, these companies actually need help. They need, like, thought partners. They need people who are going to be scrappy and move fast and try things. Whereas the big pharmaceutical companies, they don't really need us. They have this thing down. And so we started cold calling, Plated and HelloFresh and Blue Apron and Sunbasket and Green Chef and all these guys. And they were just very open to talking and to meeting. And so one thing we did was we went to like Home Depot and Lowe's, and we started buying fiberglass, just the pink fiberglass. And we would wrap that in plastic, and we would screen print it, with like a logo that my brother's girlfriend actually came up with. And so everything was just kind of thrown together. But we took it as an idea to HelloFresh and said, this thing's flexible. It's branded. Here's some thermal results showing that it'll keep your food cold and, at the desired temperature for 60 hours in a very hot ambient environment, which, by the way, was my dad's sauna. That's how we would test. Yeah, we would throw the boxes in there with these temperature loggers, and we'd crank it up, and we put a monkey wrench on it so it never turned off for like 2 days.
So funny.
And then we'd import that into Excel and build these time versus temperature graphs so we could show that, hey, the meat stays frozen.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, they were like, I skipped a couple things, but they were like, hey, we'll buy a truckload of this stuff. And that was huge for us. I mean, that was like, okay, we've definitely, we hit some sort of nerve that someone has a pain point that is big enough that they're willing to let us sell them fiberglass to line a cardboard box to keep their food cold.
Yeah.
So we did that, and we took that idea to Plated, who was one of their competitors at the time. And Plated was really helpful in the sense that they hated the idea because it was fiberglass. And they were like, that stuff is itchy. It's like, why would you do it that way? And, we're kind of like, well, how should we do it? And they said, can't you make it out of some sort of compostable plant fiber, instead of like fiberglass?
Now, this is the packaging team that's telling you this information, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
It's usually like packaging, logistics, food safety, warehouse operations, and finance. You're getting like a cross section of that group. And in these early days with these customers, people were wearing a lot of hats. So we went back to Brian's house, and as I remember it, we just basically went on Google and said, what are the largest, most abundant sources of plant fiber? And you get the usual ones like cotton comes up, and you get coconut and bamboo and different sisal and hemp. But the one that stuck out to us was this fiber called jute, Jute, and it's used in a lot of burlap and burlap bags and twine and rope and stuff like that. And it's like very, very abundant in like Southeast Asia and other parts of the world, but you don't really see a lot of it here in the US, except for sometimes if you look at how coffee's imported into the US, it's in these big, giant bags. And those bags are basically useless, once you dump out the beans. So I actually went and visited Keurig and asked if we can have all their bags, once they are finished.
Seriously, because they would have gone. They would have gone to a landfill. They would have gone as a waste.
They would have gone to a landfill. I think the second biggest, secondary waste market for it is like archery targets. So there's really not much competition for used coffee burlap bags. But we kind of saw like, this is an infinite supply of raw jute fiber.
Yes.
And if you can make fiberglass with glass fiber, why can't you make the same equipment run jute fiber,
Uh-huh.
and make sort of these felt pads
Hmm.
that in theory should insulate pretty well because it's basically the same format that people use for insulating their house.
Hmm.
Um, so all these kind of crazy ideas coalesced into us getting our hands on a lot of jute fiber, sending it to a company that used to make bedding, cotton bedding for prison mattresses, and they were like, "Yeah, we can run this fiber, um, and we can make insulation for you." So now we kind of have the insulation part figured out a little bit, and then we had to figure out the order fulfillment part. Um, but before that, we went back to Plated and we said, "Hey, we showed you fiberglass last time. You said you wanted something compostable. This is jute fiber. It's a really cool fiber. It's also a waste fiber,
Hmm.
and we can run it on the same equipment that makes fiberglass. And then you get these non-woven, lightweight blankets made from compostable plant fiber. We're going to cut them into little strips, put them in your box around the food, and it's going to keep it cold just like styrofoam."
That's
Um,
amazing.
yeah, there's a lot of storytelling. You almost have to. I call them future truths. Like this will be true.
I love that, future truths. Okay, good term to note and to
Yeah,
to put into your own arsenal of stuff. James, it's just, it seems almost, and this is not at all to negate your hard work, but it seems like you kind of gotten luck by working with these startups, right? Because they are
yeah,
open to speaking with you and open to ideating with you, and they didn't close the door off of the first approach. Can you speak to that? Do you think if you were to approach a different type of food provider like a Tyson or just any more established like food player that has products sold on through a cold chain process, they would have been more hesitant to speak with you. Um,
yeah, definitely. I mean, even
yeah.
even today, most of those companies don't have any sort of need for what we do. Everything that
Mm,
they move is already palletized and it's moved in a refrigerated or frozen truck. You know, Um, so we got very lucky that the market was just starting to experiment with this idea of what if UPS and FedEx delivered frozen food. Um, if we didn't hit the market during that time, we would have just, it just wouldn't have worked, or we
gotcha.
would have had to move to a different idea.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So you started with this idea of taking the sacks from coffee and whatnot and upcycling those, but now I'm seeing on Temper Packs, you guys are using a lot of cornstarch
Yeah,
as a base material. Talk to us about the evolution from those coffee bags to now cornstarch, which seems to be the main
yeah,
material for a lot of Temper Packs products. Is that fair to say?
that's fair to say, and it's a really good question. Um, the fiber is great sustainability wise. It's compostable, it's natural, renewable feedstock,
Hmm.
but it also has a very unstable supply chain. You're buying it on the waste market, um, and it's heavy. And jute
Mm,
actually absorbs about 10% moisture from the air, which causes it to start smelling and breaking down. Um,
mm,
you can also stretch it so dimensionally it's not that tolerant. So if someone really cares about sustainability, it's a great move. But we weren't trying to go for sustainability. We were trying to go for an overall better than styrofoam product. Um,
gotcha. That's an
and
important
because
distinction. That's an important
yeah,
distinction to make.
I think that any sustainability product also has to be just a better product, whether that's cheaper,
Mm,
whether that's better, features and benefits and
hmm.
performance.
Hmm.
Sustainability has to be like what you do behind the scenes and it's table stakes. But you also have to compete on all the
Hmm.
other criteria.
Hmm.
Um,
Completely.
so we knew that we weren't going to be able to build a huge company off this material. We kind of got lucky and had some really great partners that were eager to help us explore this. But
Hmm.
we started thinking like this thing's got to be way lighter. It's got to be more rigid. It can't be kind of floppy like flexible insulation. It's got to be recyclable instead of just compostable or plant based. It's got to be
Why do
able
you?
to be.
Why did you make that? Why are you saying it needs to be recyclable and not compostable?
Well, we did a lot of like looking into it, and about I think it's only like 4% of people actually have access to composting,
Mm,
and it's not a great for the volumes we're talking about and the frequencies. It's not a great end of life option, um,
mm,
and recycling is also in the minds of consumers, that's sort of the proxy for end of life sustainability. Is, can I put it in the blue bin? It's not
Fair
always
enough.
the best move. Sometimes
True.
recycling actually doesn't work. In
True.
fact,
Many times it doesn't actually. In the
most times
United
it
States.
doesn't. Actually,
Most
only 9% of plastics that we've
exactly.
ever made as
Yeah.
humans have
Yeah.
been recycled.
So
Um, but you do have to meet the market where it is before you can
hmm
incrementally try and push it forward. And people want recyclability. So
hmm
we wanted this next product to be to incorporate a lot of paper into it, paper
hmm
fiber that can be
hmm
more circular. And so we started testing things like, are you familiar with like honeycomb,
hmm
like honeycomb
The structure
materials?
of it. Yeah.
Yeah, we tested like that. We tested, could we make insulation out of cardboard? Um, what if we made it out of, thermoformed PET plastic that was more recyclable? But we just couldn't find anything that checked all these criteria, of like lightweight, high performance, variable dimensions, graphics. We have to be able to hinge it. We had probably like 12 things that we wanted to do with this new bet that we were making.
hmm
Um, but if you look at basically a cheese ball or anything in 7-Eleven that's you're buying that's extruded foam snacks, they pretty much check all the boxes. They're super lightweight. They're a
Uh-huh.
foam material, so actually no one ever thinks of a Cheeto as having like an R value, but it's a very good insulator. Um, yeah, it's really
Very
funny,
true.
and they're also natural,
Uh-huh.
super abundant. You can make them very low cost at
hmm
enormous volumes, and so we started thinking like, why isn't anyone using puffed polysaccharide, you know, basically puff starch
hmm
as an insulation feedstock? And also, the really cool part about using like a puffed up starch is that if you get it a little bit wet, that's glue. So you can glue stuff together without any sort of external adhesive. Um,
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't know
And
that.
so we came up with this idea of let's buy an extruder. And we actually bought like the same extruder that like Frito-Lay uses. And let's make, an enormous amount of starch and let's deposit it down, get it a little bit wet, and squish it into a panel. And then let's
hmm
cut those into rectangles and let's see what happens as far as their ability to insulate a box. And
hmm
it actually worked really well. And so it kind of checked all the criteria that we needed.
Yeah.
Um, and then we scaled it up on the East Coast, and then we scaled it up on the West Coast. And now we're producing like millions of those panels like every week.
And that's the base of most of your products. You have three different types of products that you sell. James, let's before we jump into more of the products that you guys are making and the business decisions that have evolved, because I mean this has been over a 10-year adventure. You guys have been at this for what, 12 years at this point? How long have you guys been doing this?
We officially incorporated in 2015.
2015. Okay. I mean that's still very, I mean, closing up to a decade. That's still
Yep.
an amazing feat. When you had this idea, when you started with you and your friends back right after college, and you had this idea for this material that you found and for these problems, did you keep that idea close to your chest? Did you feel like you had to sort of protect this idea, or were you really talkative about this with your community at large, not just with the companies that you're cold calling?
Um, well, I heard one time someone say that even if you have a really good idea and you tell everyone about it, chances are no one's going to listen. So I don't think we were that afraid. Um,
hmm
Nowadays we're a little bit more cautious with our new ideas,
Yeah.
but at the time there wasn't really a lot of people to talk to anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So the main people we were talking to were our customers, and they have always really been very active in helping us
Mm-hmm.
design products.
Mm-hmm.
um, that and maybe investors and financial partners, but other than that, we didn't really see a big audience of people who were even really interested in this.
I guess my question is a little bit more on the personal end. Like, were you very talkative about this idea of entrepreneurship with this particular, you know, again, product and problem set with your family and friends?
um,
Um, did you get the
Not really. I
support from
mean,
them? Is that
talk
something that you did?
to friends about what we were doing, starting this
hmm
company, and obviously family. My dad was our, first investor, um, but uh, but we weren't going to like community startup meetups or anything like that. Um,
Yeah.
so we weren't
Gotcha.
trying to be under the radar, but we, you know, there wasn't a big community of people interested in what we were doing.
When you were in that phase of starting this off and contacting Keurig for the burlap sacks and stuff of that nature, was there a doubt in your mind? Did you think about, well, if this doesn't really go well in the next 6 to 12 months, I'm going to stop this and get a normal job and whatnot? Was there fear involved in this time? Like, when did you really know that you wanted to commit fully to this idea and know that you were going to have to make sacrifices to make this thing happen?
Yeah, it sounds weird, but there was no doubt in my mind.
Mm,
And
that was it.
looking back, I'm like, why did you have no doubt in your mind? And I think it was because one, I didn't have a big career that I was leaving. I literally had nothing. This was the first thing basically,
Yeah.
except for an internship at Boeing. So there was nothing to compare it to. But also, the I didn't have a mortgage or wasn't married, didn't have the 2 kids I have now. So you're kind of invincible when you have nothing to lose.
Mhm.
And it was just pure ignorant optimism that this thing's going to work. um, I don't know if I could do that again at the point I'm at right now. There'd be too much there. I know
Too much
too
on your
much about
shoulders.
statistics. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense, man. That makes total sense. You were young when you started this, and this is a question I ask every entrepreneur that comes into the show. When you made that switch and when you made that jump, what did you do for like health insurance?
um, Man, I don't even know. I
Like,
guess I
were you
never
still under
really.
your parents' health insurance or something like that, or
Um, I might have been. I think what are you sort of covered into like 25 or something like that?
26? I
Um,
think at least
yeah.
now. Yeah.
So probably that was it. I just don't remember ever like going to the doctor that much.
Jeez, okay, lucky James. James is just a lucky guy. That's what we're learning right here.
um,
I love it, man. What about
but
what about the impact you've had on it had on your personal financial life, in the sense that you said your father was your first investor. Obviously, you starting the business off. You're having these conversations with clients, but I'm assuming, and I'd love for you to elaborate on this, that you weren't getting paid by TemperPack yet. Were you just living off of your own savings or family members helping you out? Like, how did you pay for things when you were 23 and starting this company?
I think it was a combination of some personal savings,
Hmm.
not much. Um, us three, we all lived at each other's like houses for a while. Like Charles would live at Brian's house. We worked out of my parents' garage. We would work out of Brian's garage. Um, when we had to go somewhere, we would sleep at like Motel 6 or like whatever the $39 a night place is. Um, we didn't have a lot of expenses, and once we got the initial purchase order from HelloFresh, we were able to get some seed funding, which
Mm,
allowed us to give ourselves like a pretty small but enough kind of salary.
mm,
Um, so there was a little gap where there was no money, but there was also not a lot of expenses because we were just doing a lot of testing and a
hmm.
lot of marketing. But we never hired a marketing firm; we would just do it on PowerPoint. We never hired a testing firm; we would just do it in the basement. So like there wasn't a lot of cash. There was no cash coming in, but there also wasn't a lot of cash going out.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, so you get this purchase order for your first order, and then you use that to raise a round of seed funding.
Mhm.
Within that, you decided to bake into the equation this salary for the three
Yeah.
founders.
Mhm.
Okay, is that the right time to start to pay yourself as a founder? How do you know as a founder when to start to pay yourself?
One of our VCs one time said something really wise, and they were like, "We don't want you to stress about money. We want you to stress about the business."
Hmm.
um, and so I think that the business is an entity that needs to support its expenses. You are one of those expenses.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be a huge expense, but to not pay yourself should not be seen as a glorified place to be for too long, because it means that the business is not really operating with full transparency over its expenses. So I think you want to, once you commit to trying to build something, I think you do want to bake in your salary to as a line item, even if you
Mm-hmm.
dial it way down. You want it to be there. I think there's something a little bit too raw about like, oh, here's the company and here's me. I don't pay myself, but I'm also giving a lot of free service to the company.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to stand on its own.
That makes total sense. I think for some who want to start something, there's this notion of, you start a business, you can't pay yourself for a long time, you're going to be uninsured for a bit. Like there's this ambiguity to this. And I think that it's a piece of the conversation around entrepreneurship that just doesn't get enough light. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that transparency there.
One thing, just to add to that, whenever I talk to my dad, he always tries to personify the business as a living entity. It
Mm-hmm.
has needs. It wants to go places. It wants to communicate things about what it needs. And it's helpful, I think, to build some mental distance between yourself and the business.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those needs is that this business needs to be capitalized, depending on what it's going to go do. And to get really clear on what is the capital requirement for this business to be able to stand up, I think is something that you just got to really think through and kind of be honest about.
You are the materials expert on the founding team, and you have a partner who it seems like each partner brings a certain set of skill sets to the table. What advice would you give a would-be entrepreneur, someone with an idea, to or knows of a problem that they want to solve, but they don't have the technical expertise to solve that, right? To develop the material that works with this, or to develop potentially like an application or some sort of digital piece, tool to address the problem. What advice would you give that person who sees a discrepancy between the idea and their own internal skill sets?
Well, I think the good news is that a business and in the startup phase especially, it needs a lot of different things, and so I would start with asking yourself, um, what am I sort of uniquely qualified to bring to the table?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, what what feels like play to me that other people it feels like work, like what do I really like to do? um, and then you know that you can focus on that part, and then you got to start asking yourselves, okay, well, the business again, it's this separate entity, and if it could talk, it would say, I have these other needs. I need someone that can make sure that we are financially okay. I need someone who can sell, who can craft a good pitch deck. um, and then I think you have to figure out, do I know people that are really good at those things? If not, uh, how would I go about trying to hire someone, to join me? Is there someone I could talk to who might know someone who's good in these areas that I'm not? But I think one potential misstep would be to think that you can do it all, because some people can, but
Mm-hmm.
usually I feel like people are they have one skill set or one quality like in spades, and they have a deficit somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. James, going back to the actual products that you guys are making, into the business of TemperPack, can you elaborate on the three main products that you guys sell, and the decision from what it looks like on your website, to separate green cell foam from the rest of TemperPack? If you click on the link, it takes you to a different website. Could you elaborate
Yeah.
on that distinction?
Yeah, so Green Cell Foam is actually a much older company than TemperPack. They're, I think, like over 20 years old. And they were the first ones in the market with starch foam. And
Hmm.
so when we were the first ones in the market with a different type of way of manufacturing it, but we always looked at them as like the most worthy competitor out there. They're a really great team, really great product,
Mm-hmm.
um, very loyal customers. And so we would kind of be afraid when we would go to the table and we knew that they were also at the table with a customer. Um, and we always thought that someday we're going to figure out how to partner with them or something. And the timing was just right that we were able to acquire that business, which makes a lot of sense because Climacell is in Virginia and it's
Hmm.
also in Las Vegas. Green Cell Foam was right in Reno and then also in Michigan, so right in the middle
Hmm.
of the country. And we're selling starch foam. They were selling starch foam. Climacell was being targeted towards more heavy, large scale users. Green Cell Foam was being targeted towards more smaller users, but a much more diverse set of customers. So it was really a great combination, and we feel super happy that we've been able to make it work and integrate. And that team's amazing. But they are um, we still kind of treat them as separate offerings, even
Okay.
though we're technically one company now. And then
Yeah.
the third product is something that we're just launching now. We have it in about, I think, 4 or 5 states, and they're these really small machines, and they make a paper insulation on demand. And the thinking behind that was, if you were going to take down TemperPack and you had an infinite budget to do it, what would you do? And then, okay, well, let's go do that first before someone else does.
Yeah.
And that line of thinking led us to this conclusion that we need to build a product that can be made closer to where it's being consumed.
Mm.
It's the same idea of like if you go to the airport or the gym, you fill up the water, in the reusable thing. It makes more sense than transporting water into the airport. Or you see solar panels that are, on top of residential houses. It makes more sense than transporting electricity. So this
Hmm.
idea of making it where you consume it was something that we thought someone was going to bring to the insulation market,
Hmm.
especially because insulation is around 96, 97% air. So when you
Yeah.
transport it, you're basically transporting nothing.
Yeah.
And it costs a lot to transport it. So we kind of said, okay, what would this sort of magical, theoretical new product look like? Well, it'd be fully recyclable, paper based. It could have variable thickness to it. It could have variable branding to it. It would be made on a very compact, easy to use machine. If you can operate a dishwasher or a dryer, like you should be able to operate this machine. And
Yeah.
and we sort of tried a bunch of different ways of making that work and landed on this idea of creating these waves between two layers of paper, which is why we called it Wavecraft. So we're really
Mm.
excited about that product,
Yeah.
and we think it's going to help serve a part of the market that we can't quite reach with these big heavy solutions like
Mm.
Climate Cell and Green Cell Foam.
But it's what's really interesting, and I think this is a great learning lesson for others, is the evolution of your business from a packaging company, effectively like a materials based company, into building hardware, which is what it seems
Yeah,
like you're making with Wavercraft. Was there a disconnect in internal domain knowledge on building hardware and building these actual pieces of machinery versus pumping out you know foam starch and paper products and stuff like that? How are you guys bridging that information gap between where you guys are at
yeah.
before
Um,
and
so
evolving
phase one
your
of the
internal
company was
processes to be
like
able to create this?
everyone did everything externally. We all had external partners.
Hmm.
Phase two was we brought simple actions inside, like sealing, folding, taping, packing, cutting. Um, Phase three with Climacell was we brought manufacturing in house. So big, heavy equipment, laminators, extruders, conveyors, hoppers, dispensers, cutting equipment, rotary blades, like really pretty serious. But we didn't design it, but we learned how to upgrade it and use it safely and fix it and do preventative maintenance. And then sort of this next evolution was, okay, what if we design and build it and use it to make our products and give it to other people so they can make their own products? And we knew that was the course, but we wanted to do it in the right way. So we actually hired about 7 mechanical engineers and brought them all in house, set up a whole new space um, purely for mechanical engineering and machine design and fabrication. So you're right that it was a big step,
Hmm.
but we went into that knowing that hey, this is some new territory for us.
Makes sense. That makes sense. And again, we wish you wish you the best on that one.
Thanks.
James, to be very clear and explicit with our listeners, what is the environmental benefit of using TemperPack's products versus the traditional alternatives?
So there's a few lenses that you could look at for this.
Hmm.
I typically break it up into three parts of the life cycle.
Hmm.
One is, where are you getting the stuff? And so if it's a styrofoam cooler, you're getting it from fossil fuels, you're getting it from non-renewable resources, and then you have to convert it, and there's a lot of sort of embodied carbon in the conversion process.
Hmm.
So something like styrofoam is not only made from these fossil fuel resources, but you also have to put a ton of heat and steam and pressure into blowing it up. Um, and there are blowing agents associated with that. So there's what's the environmental burden on the conversion of that raw feedstock, and then the third one is what most people think about, which is the end of life.
Hmm.
And what happens to this? Can you reuse it? Can you upcycle it into something else? Can you recycle it into the same type of product? Is it compostable? If it is, are people going to be able to have access to those facilities? Is it recyclable? If so, what's the economic value of recycling it? What's the fiber yield that you're going to get from it? What's the
Hmm.
likelihood that people will recycle it? Or is this something that should go to a landfill? And I don't always think the landfill is the worst option. Like, if you had a pound of paper and you could recycle it, or you had, half an ounce of something non-recyclable, like, it's like, well, which one is better? Because not everyone's going to recycle that first option. So
Hmm.
um, all this wraps up into sort of one metric usually, which is, uh, a life cycle analysis that shows your total greenhouse gas emissions and global warming potential. And I think we publish one of those every year. It's actually fascinating to learn about. It's extremely detailed. They look
Hmm.
at where you're getting it, where your suppliers are getting it. There's
Yeah,
different
that goes to
tiers
the
that you
whole.
can look at. You got to
Yeah.
assign likelihoods to different end consumer behavior. So it's pretty cool, and I'm glad that we do a really thorough job of reporting that. But those are the three buckets. Where are you getting it, how
Hmm.
much energy you putting into it, and how easy
Hmm.
is it to responsibly get rid of it.
Hmm. No, I think that's a very good way of framing a product's life cycle in general. What do you think? What would you like to see change from a government policy perspective to enable products like yours to scale? And like what I mean by products like yours, like more sustainable packaging alternatives, to scale as opposed to the fossil fuel based alternatives that are on the
Yeah.
market.
Um, well, here's an idea that I'm just kind of making up in real time. Might not be a good one,
Perfect.
but
Perfect.
I think it's really hard to get companies to change
Hmm.
because, rightly so, they're saying, "Hey, our customers want something cheap," you know, and
Hmm.
a company only exists to serve customers. So it's hard to approach it from that side because it's like, hey, you now have to sell eggs in a molded pulp thing. You can't use it. It's like, well, okay, the price of eggs is going up then. It's like the company's not going to just absorb. Companies will never just absorb a cost. They will always, innovate
Yeah.
or automate or pass it on. So they're slippery. You can't get them to do things. But what companies do care a lot about is customers.
Mm.
So I think if you want to make sustainable packaging happen faster, it kind of sounds bad, but you got to make it a priority for end users, you know? Um, and if I had a scale outside on my driveway
Yeah.
and I was charged based on how much was in the recycle bin versus the landfill bin, um, I would start thinking about stuff differently.
Yeah.
I don't have that
Yeah.
scale though. I don't really, as a consumer, I don't feel the pain at all.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, if there's a similar, product that's just as good and sustainable, I might buy it if it's cheaper.
Mhm.
But
Of course.
and I'm, not everyone thinks this way, but the vast majority, it's like it's not really my problem. It's far away and there's billions of us and we're not sure how to
Yeah.
solve it. And I can get away with not solving it. So
Yeah.
I think if you're going to create change, you got to get the companies to respond to a new consumer demand.
Mm.
So I think maybe I'm not a big fan of taxes, but I think governments could use that to try and maybe drive consumer behavior, to put pressure
Interesting.
on companies to innovate. But like I said, I
Mhm.
don't know if that's a good or bad idea.
No, for sure. No, I think no, that's a valid perspective to have. I think again that what the government's already playing a role in setting the playing field for consumer behavior to occur and for businesses to operate within, and it's about shifting it to make a better future for us. Like, what society do we want to live in 20, 30, 40 years? And sustainable, and
Yeah,
the climate crisis as a concept is very hard for people to wrap their heads around. It's a very hard problem to not just articulate, but obviously for us to deeply understand. Because for a lot of us, specifically us in the West, as you pointed out, James, the problem is far away. Once I put something in the bin and it's gone and it's picked up on Wednesday or whatever, I'll
yeah,
never think of it and see it again. I live in a city. I don't really engage with that stuff. And when we
yeah,
think about, the water levels rising, like you see it incrementally. Now, this is obviously not to negate the issues and to negate the problems and whatnot, because obviously that's why we're here. That's what the Growing Green Ventures is about. But it's a unique problem to deal with, and it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their heads around, and therefore
yeah,
action can be slow and ineffective at times. As one of the reasons is, at least I'll say that.
yeah.
Um,
I think
yeah.
one other place where I think governments can be effective is in enforcing correct marketing language.
Mm,
I think that
totally.
there's a lot of people who want to do the right thing, but they don't know what to make of the messages that they're getting.
Mhm.
Like
100%.
this is recyclable. This is recyclable in a store drop off. This is compostable. This is
Yeah.
plastic free. This is low emissions. It's like I don't know what that means. I want to do the right thing, and we go up against a lot of companies. There's one that sells this PET fiber,
Uh-huh.
completely not recyclable, but they stamp these big recyclability logos all over it. Um, and there's nothing we can do, and it's a cheap product.
Yeah.
So I wish that they weren't allowed to call it recyclable.
Mhm.
So I think that there's a role in government as far as like consumer marketing,
Mhm.
making sure that that's truthful. Um, yeah,
Touche. Touche. I mean, greenwashing is a really big problem, and companies for too long have gotten away with saying things are one thing and in reality they're the other. And consumers are uneducated, and it's really not. I'm not blaming the average consumer for their lack of knowledge on this. Their intentions are pure. They want to do good, but it's so confusing. It's so
yeah,
confusing out there what to do with this and that. And then, of course, when you want to do something good, like you recycle, you put that plastic in the recycling bin, and then you learn that our recycling infrastructure is completely broken. And as you said earlier,
yeah,
only 9% of global plastics ever get recycled. I mean, let me rephrase that. 91%
yeah,
of all plastics do not get recycled, period. I mean, that's insane. That's so, it's like, well, what am I as the individual supposed to do? It's
yeah,
very disheartening, to say the least. Again, you should be recycling and you should be doing as much as you can, but I understand where a lot of pessimism comes from, let's say, in this. I'm curious, when in my consulting day, I was helping companies address their sustainability initiatives and define their strategy. A big push for these companies was regulation, was upcoming regulation in different markets, obviously domestic and international, and these companies need to react to that. Again, reacting to government policy changes. You, as a packaging provider, has there been any packaging regulation that you've had to adapt your business to? Or is there any regulation that you see coming down the pipeline that could make a difference for your business?
So far, nothing that we've had to sort of react to.
Hmm.
Of course, we've done all the ISO certifications and
Hmm.
that type of on the operation side.
Hmm.
Um, Surprisingly, there's not a lot of regulation around how food that's sent through the mail should be protected. Um, and
Huh.
we know that you don't want your salmon fillet showing up over 41 degrees. But the company that originated that shipment, they're not really audited. That's an internal, process
Yeah.
that they've developed for keeping that cold, which that's very surprising considering the millions of boxed perishables that are, going around the country at any
Hmm.
given week. Um, so I think that's one area that would be very impactful for us, probably in a
Uh-huh.
good way, is if there was regulation around, hey, every company that ships something that can be ingested, whether that's a pharma product or whether that's a food and beverage side, um,
Hmm.
we're going to audit their protocol for how they develop a pack out and how they qualify it. And I think you'd see that a lot of people, especially during the summer, they're probably getting warm food that may or may not be okay, you know? I
Heads
mean,
up, everyone.
yeah, I mean, we haven't really heard of any big scares, so it seems like it's actually kind of okay. But
Yeah.
I think it's because most customers are doing the right thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of scary that they don't have to be, you know?
Mm-hmm.
No one's really checking. Um, but the other area that we've heard some stuff about is like this extended producer responsibility,
Responsibility Act.
and I think we'd be okay with that too, because you know, we're putting what we believe to be a very good product out in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and so helping people adopt that more and phase out worse materials is in line with what we're here to do. So
100.
those are kind of the two things that, in terms of regulation, that we've heard about.
Totally. Totally. James, on a more, but this is actually both personal and professional. What's next for your business, and what do you see as success? What does success look like for you, both personally and professionally, in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, as far as what's next for us, I mean, we are very opportunity oriented, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So we every time we've had a 5-year plan, it never works. Like it never turns out. We've done two of
Sure.
them since we're 10 years old, and we
Yeah.
just end up in a wildly different place. It's a good place, but you know, we definitely can't predict the future. But what we can do is just keep listening to
Mm-hmm.
customers, trying to understand where are their problems, where are their constraints to growth, where are their perceived limitations, and how can we help them design a better way around all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we keep doing that, the market will keep rewarding us. Um, the market hopefully continues to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we want to be, you know, $1 billion company that's the leader in cold chain packaging. So whether it's the coolant, whether it's the box, whether it's the insulation, whether it's the machinery that helps you produce it, or whether it's the software that tells you, you know, hey, this shipment going from New Jersey to Atlanta and this month for this 2-day shipment with this amount of protein needs this amount of coolant. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
want to have the business intelligence side of it too, that helps you make better, more sustainable, lower weight, lower cost packaging
Mm-hmm.
decisions.
Okay. What about you, man? What about James? What about the man, the entrepreneur that is James McGoff? What is that? What does the future look like?
Well, these days, you know, I think the hardest thing is balance. You know,
Mm.
it's especially if you have that one gear that always wants to go, you know, 100 miles an hour on ideas and innovation and sales and growth, and you know, you got to figure out also, like, when I'm 80 looking back, you know, what are the things I'm going to be proud of, and
Mhm.
increasingly that's, you know, I want a really good relationship with my family, you know, I want a good
Mhm.
marriage, I want to make sure that I stay in touch with friends, you know. I also really want to build businesses. So I think what's next for me is you know, continue to try to keep all the plates spinning,
For sure.
find as much balance in the days you can. And one thing I heard, which I really liked, was a good life is just a series of good days strung together. You know, so
That is
you don't
true.
need to plan your whole life. Just you know, are you having a series of good days? If so, you're probably on the right track.
I love that. I love that. On that note, James, I'd love to ask a question. How has being a parent impacted your entrepreneurial journey?
Oh man, it's I was wondering a lot about how that was going to be, you know, 2 years ago before it happened, and
Mhm.
it's been a double-edged sword, I'd say.
Hmm.
One, there's just less time. You know, there's just less time,
Yeah.
um, and so you learn to either prioritize differently or be hyper efficient with your time. Um, and you're not, frankly, you're not quite as dangerous as you were. Like, you can't just pick up the, you know, your bag
Uh,
and go to the airport and go see a customer, because you
mhm.
might have to drop someone off at you know, preschool. But on the other side, I think it gives you purpose that you didn't have
Mhm.
before. um, and you know, it's like that movie, what was it, with the Irish guy who's in the ring fighting, and the guy's like, what are you fighting for? He's like, I'm fighting for milk, you know. So it's like there's something really nice about, and even though I'm doing well, I like to put myself in the mentality of, no, I'm not doing well. Like everything counts,
Gotcha.
you know. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
there's this motivating factor that's nice to having more responsibility, you know.
Mhm.
Um, Overall, though, I mean, it's been a huge blessing, and definitely, I remember I was talking to my dad, and he had 6 kids, and he was talking to one of his friends, and they're like, how did you build a business with having 6 kids? And his response was, how could I do it without them? Like
Mm,
where would the drive come from? Um,
mm.
so I thought that was an interesting take as well. So yeah, there's pros and cons. I think you're a little more restricted, but I think you have a little bit more, purpose, and you don't waste your time.
That's true. I remember back when I was a kid, and I was playing basketball in high school, and we'd have like morning practice and afternoon practice and stuff like that. And it's funny how when you actually get a little bit more busier, you get a little bit more efficient, right? And you can actually fit more into your day. I'm not equating basketball practice to having kids. I'm
Yeah,
just just saying, it's interesting when you have nothing, no boundaries around your life. Things can just sort of fall around. Whereas if you have a little bit more structure, you're a little bit more, you're sharper and more efficient in this
yeah,
manner.
yeah. If
Um,
you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Precisely. James, is any last words for our audience? Any sort of advice on entrepreneurship or comments about your business that you care to share?
Be wary of advice.
Touche.
Um, I don't know. I think that sometimes planning and thinking and strategizing is seductive in a way that doing isn't.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm,
I've always found that, like, just start.
mm-hmm,
If you have a product idea, try to sell it to someone.
mm-hmm.
And if they say, for the first reason they say no, make that your next thing you want to go fix. Um, but bias towards action, I think, is an important thing to remember. But I don't know what I'm doing. I'm still making this up, so don't listen to me.
Let me just say that, James. I appreciate you for not only your time today, but obviously what you're doing for the world. The world needs more packaging like what you're doing, and your story is really inspirational to many. So I appreciate your time and the ability to come on the show and get to share that. So thanks again, and yeah, I appreciate you.
Thanks to you too. I mean, podcasts like this are literally like mental armor. Like, you wake up in the morning, go on a walk, listen to a podcast.
Yeah,
You're in a whole different state for the day. So what you're doing is really important and good work.
well, I appreciate that. Thanks, James. It's really nice of
Cool.
you to say.